Hello there, so imagine this. I just downloaded a cool new game called Osu. I played a few maps and figured out that they each had different levels of difficulty. As should have been expected, I sucked at all of them, but I also wondered, what was the hardest map in the game? When you started out, you probably wondered the same thing. Just how people are attracted to world records and speedruns and limit-pushing extremes, there's something innately interesting about Osu's most difficult maps. Even from the beginning, players want to know how high the ceiling reaches, and that natural captivation is something that mappers can take advantage of. Some mappers have successfully become known for making the hardest maps, one of the most outstanding being Mismagius. Or maybe better known as Blue Dragon. Whether you're aware of it or not, you know him. He's the guy behind an older generation of crazy maps that have maintained their popularity up through today. There's a big difference between the mapping scene then versus now though. Hard maps in the current mapping climate are everywhere and frequently promoted through the ranked and loved categories. In Mismagius' prime, however, hard maps were still popular, but weren't given nearly as much of a focus from the player or mapper crowds. I personally think the ways limit-pushing maps have changed on Osu is interesting, so you know the drill by now. I organized an interview with Mismagius to understand how he witnessed these changes, beginning from when he was an emerging mapper around 2010-2011.
I'd say there just wasn't interest in making hard maps back then, as most people just wanted to enjoy playing songs they liked. Like, there was a lot of BBA influence, and few players wanted to be actually challenged by extremely difficult maps. There wasn't really any encouragement to make hard maps. The ranking system was score-based, and star rating was really flawed. It kept, insane maps, and hard maps were pretty much the same thing. It mostly depended on people using difficulty names for that. The biggest example is Tama no Taiso, that one map that has the mapper naming the difficulties. It was just a popularity thing, you see that name, you think, okay, it's gonna be a hard map.
And in case you didn't know, No Guard here was the difficulty name used for Mismagius' over-the-top ranked maps at the time. Although, ranked isn't the right word exactly. While they're practically the same thing today, in the past there were some important differences between the ranked and approved beatmap listings. Score was the main player ranking metric, so maps that gave too much score were blocked from ranked. However, if they were decent, they could be approved instead. This gave maps leaderboards for players to compete on, but didn't reward ranked score, like how loved maps don't give PP. Seems simple enough, but for whatever reason, approval apparently evolved to permit vaguely defined special maps their own leaderboards as well.
As far as I remember, it was kind of whatever doesn't go into ranked and is good enough to play, it goes into approval. Hard maps weren't really accepted for ranking in the early days because they were more of a gimmick. Yeah, I think I had a small issue with Rainbow Tylenol, I don't know. The less difficulty didn't break score, I'm not sure, but the map was too hard for ranking. Someone in the bat said, Hell is ridiculous too insane to go for ranking. Sorry, but I insist that you push Hell for approval. So I had to make sure that all diffs got ranked except the last one, which would get approved and didn't count towards score ranking.
Compared to modern day mapping systems, everything approval barred off from ranked is irrelevant. The ranked section supports all kinds of weird gimmicks, extremely hard maps, and even maps designed to abuse the player leaderboard metric. Only stuff that legitimately breaks the ranking criteria or doesn't represent music is rejected. Anyway, Mismagius is known for making some of the most notable approved maps, so we went over how that began.
Then Forever was my first hard approved map and my most popular map for a long while. And then came Airman, Big Black, Big Money, and Rainbow Dash. After these, I think Worldwide Choppers and Pensamento also had their fair share of popularity. Back in 2009, I made an extremely, I had a bunch of extremely dumb maps that were supposed to be in raking style. He was my biggest inspiration. They were a complete mess and almost unplayable. After that, my first successful attempt was Band Forever, which was my first Renard map, and it got quite popular for a long time.
Band Forever is a baby's first beat map by today's difficulty standards though. What's more exceptional and is still a big name in the Osu community is the first approved map currently above 7 stars, Airman.
Zitrot came to me in the Mod Help channel and he just asked if I wanted to make a collab for what would be the most impossible map ever made that was actually playable. So, since we were both heavily inspired by symmetry-based styles, it was just natural to create symmetrical jumps. It was actually supposed to be a gimmick with the Airman fan. It was really stupid, but it kinda worked. And I eventually came up with the idea of the back and forth jumps that everyone hates nowadays. Needless to say, the whole impossible map idea fell apart when we sent the map to Cookiezi, and he did a 900 combo on his first few tries, and nowadays it's everyone can FC it basically.
Airman is definitely a popular map, but it has nowhere near the level of clout as The Big Black. I think anyone could agree that this is literally the most iconic map on Osu. This song is a jumble of notes played at inhuman speeds, which, when paired with its excessively intense map, feels like it should be the hardest map ever, especially to a new player who doesn't know any better. Mismagius told me a bit about how he views the map, including why it's harder to play than it really should be.
I think it became like such a big meme because it's really hard. The song is easily recognizable and some good players became addicted to it for some reason. Like you would usually see that in the most played section of a lot of players from that time. And even nowadays, a lot of players spend a lot of time playing that map. I think the difficulty of this map comes more from dealing with slider leniency, which I didn't completely understand at the time. I just treated them like perfectly flowing sliders. I didn't think people would actually like just click the beginning of the slider. There are a few 1/4 jumps that are pretty dumb because of it. But other than that, I think it's actually relatively straightforward to play.
Relatively. Big Black still, has some of the most awkward object arrangements ever, but that's not too much of a problem. The map is supposed to be obnoxiously hard, and being uncomfortable to play likely solidified its place as the impossible Osu map for the last 7 years. Yes, 7 years. A long time during which the way people create difficult maps has changed quite a lot.
Eventually my maps started getting a little bit less popular because of the whole insane mapper thing growing old, and my maps also grew older and felt less comfortable to play. So nowadays pretty much every new mapper strives to make 8-star maps, and there are plenty of mappers who are specialized in making hard maps that flow and play well. Like the biggest example is the Artless maps. So as for my maps, they're not technical and they are not too comfortable, so they are in that awkward spot where they just don't feel special or interesting enough to become too popular. But it seems like 2-assisted speedcar is doing quite well at the moment.
If I were to speculate a bit, I'd say there are some pretty outlying reasons why tons of new mappers have shifted towards making these MLG high-spacing jump maps. Star rating changes would be an obvious one. Without the 5-star cap, it's possible to see a value for how hard a map is. Even if it's not entirely accurate, seeing a number go higher and higher is part of the inherent appeal behind hard maps. So with everyone seeing these numbers now, everyone wants to make the next highest star rating map. PP has the same appeal too. Now that PP is no longer based on score ranking, people want to make maps that reward a higher, more alluring number. More importantly than numbers though is likely community hype. High-level players and streamers make a big difference. It's why Ruruchi full comboing this Mafalda map helped the map gain so much attention. Back when Mismagius was a big name for making hard maps, there wasn't such a huge community to invoke hype, whereas now new mappers are inspired by the popular maps they see famous streamers play, so they're inspired by those maps and make similar maps, maybe one day hoping to see their creation on stream.
For a long while, I felt terrible about being regarded as the insane mapper, and only that. People would just come to me asking for more impossible maps while I was focused on other projects. Or they would just disregard me as a mapper because of these specific maps. And I went a long time without mapping anything too hard because of it, and I wanted to lose this reputation as much as possible. But it's impossible to do that. So eventually I just came to terms with it. But I still wish people appreciated my easier maps.
Generally, this is an issue I'm sure all mappers face at some point. People remember a mapper for all their maps, but a mapper wants to be known for what they create in the moment, since that's what really reflects their current self. I've gone through the same thing because I can't stand my old maps either, and I imagine this is especially true for mapper lives through changes to the community's general opinions on mapping.
So about map standards, in the first few years, Osu was just supposed to be an elite beat agent simulator, so maps were just supposed to be people's favorite songs in the EBA format, in the EBA style. As time went on and the community started considering alternative mapping styles, I think the biggest change in map standards was around 2013 or 2014, when mappers like Skystar and Hanser went against a lot of concepts that were considered fundamental, and after that everything changed, like tech maps and comfortable maps are the norm. Which actually kinda saddens me a bit, because awkward maps, which were considered fun challenges back then, now are just hated by a good portion of the community.
When going through something like this, a lot of old mappers just accept that they're out of touch while letting all the new kids go around with their fancy new mapping styles. Mismagius didn't take that approach though. He actually tried to update his mapping to better fit the current meta, through which he was able to recognize some elements of what really separates old and new mapping techniques.
For a long time, I thought that mapping in the old ways was fine and new mapping styles were killing the game, and when I finally realized that these new maps were actually good, it was too late. And by 2016 or so, I was still mapping like it was 2012 or 2011. Eventually, mappers' opinions started to bother me a lot. I didn't really like being treated as a joke mapper or that guy that maps like it's 2011, so I did everything I could to change that, and I tried learning the current techniques. There was the Skrillex map, Holding On. That one has like a lot of high angle jumps, and there was this specific point where I looked for feedback on mod help, and some guy said there are 3 circles in a row, and he started talking about how that was really bad and how that doesn't play well. So I was enraged by it. I was like, people aren't gonna be bothered by that, but eventually I learned that that pattern was really bad to play because of it. I mean, I tried to make maps comfortable, but I didn't think about the idea of sharp angles being like the only thing you want in your map. For the longest time, like where I was trying to learn modern mapping, I hated mapping like that because it limited everything. Like every note I had to think like, is the next note gonna be a comfortable movement? So that was terrible for me. It just didn't feel like actual mapping. It just felt like designing something to be as playable as possible instead of something actually creative or fun to play.
This shift of attention towards angles is what really stood out to me. From what I'm gathering, mappers from Mismagius' time never really considered angles between objects as an important factor for map design, but since the beginning of my time as a mapper, I was told it was relevant. Angles are just another element of ordinary map design now, though not with as much strictness on everything being sharp, comfortable angles anymore. I feel like people are more or less over that phase, yet still consider contrasting sharp versus wide angles as a tool for expressing musical contrast. So even though the comfort of angles isn't a necessity anymore, angles are too ingrained in mapping to be ignored like they were in the past. And unsurprisingly, controlling angles is an important thing for making hard maps as a mapper now. But anyway, having successfully adapted his style over 10 years goes to show how much Mismagius has done as a mapper. Maybe he's most known for the Big Black and similar old maps, but he's also shown that he can do more impressive work than that on both ends of the difficulty spectrum. Go play some of his maps and you'll see for yourself how someone can change over the course of a decade. So yeah, I have no elegant way to end this. Thanks to Mismagius for the interview, thanks to you for watching, and I'll see you next week.
In fact, I spent more time of my life as an Osu player than not knowing about Osu. Like, I'm 20 years old and I have 10 and a bit years of Osu, so I went through so much because of it. I went through so much because of this game, and it's impossible for me to think what my life would be without it.